whether these courses were single semester or were any of them year long, because like that in itself would seem to be 15 sounds like impossible within a semester, but maybe in a year-long course that would be more realistic. So I was just wondering if that came up in how you analyzed or what the question you asked, or whether people just volunteer that information.
We did not ask that, but I didn't get the sense that any of them were 2-semester courses. But I don't know for sure.
I think it's more like in your career, or when you think about your teaching in a large scale, you could probably list 15 themes that you've taught.
Right. So yeah,
over the long haul kind of thing. That's what I probably.
Right, because we looked at a syllabus for, say, a particular semester of a particular course, but some people sent us several syllabi from several semesters. And when we asked the question, we weren't looking for what you last taught, just sort of what people had taught in general. So yeah, we were getting information from multiple semesters, I'm sure. Yeah. Good question. I think I found it pretty interesting. One of the things we found, we also asked them what kind of writing assignments they assigned. And we kind of rank ordered them and found out that the vast majority of the writing assignments were your typical academic research paper, maybe once in a while research paper with a presentation or a research proposal. What differentiated them is that a lot of these had to do with research on writing itself, right? So there were a lot of autoethnographic assignments. So people would assign an autoethnography, and other people would assign a literacy narrative. So that kind of got grouped together in literacy assignments. But whether or not somebody was asking students to collect original data in a systematic way or reflect, would differ from person to person. But reflection was probably, I don't know, Rebecca, would you say that most people included reflection? That's sort of my recollection.
Yeah, our study wasn't really quantitative, so we didn't count, like we didn't say 15 people did reflection, but I think most people did some kind of reflection or metacognition.
Yeah.
And right. Yeah, and literacy narrative was big. I don't know what you're counting as autoethnography, like kind of like beginner's autoethnography that maybe a freshman might write, like a literacy narrative. Or can you speak more about what you're thinking of, Sarah, about literacy narrative?
Yeah, so I actually taught in my FIW class, I taught writing about self, and we usually teach 3 genres. So I started with literacy narrative, where I told my students to write about their learning and reading experiences. Then I sort of taught them how to write a creative nonfiction. And then later on, I sort of blend them together. And my 3rd genre was autoethnography. Because I thought that it would be a nice way to sort of progressively guide them towards autoethnographic based reading, where they're analyzing themselves as research participants and drawing broader connections from their practices and what they think what writing is, or anything for that matter. So yeah, that was my whole idea. And but I did it because that's how I was taught. My background is in TESOL, and I grew up in India, where we don't have writing as a discipline, or didn't have for a very long time. So when I took my master's courses in the US, I was told to write literacy narrative as part of writing classes, second language writing classes. I was like, oh my God, nobody has ever asked me like that. How have I learned English or language acquisition process or reading experiences? So that was sort of a mindset which led me to sort of think about its pedagogical connection when I am teaching first year writing composition.
Well, that's really That's really cool. I just, as an aside, the stuff I'm doing down in Cuba, one of the things I'm doing is asking people, how did you learn to write? How did you learn to write in English? How did you learn to teach writing in English? Right. And the level of self-awareness is much lower than I at first anticipated, because they didn't have these classes, right? So they've just picked things up along the way whenever they could. And it's pretty interesting.
I have two questions, a question and a comment. So Cindy, I wonder if creative nonfiction was in our data. But the other thing, isn't Cuba the country with the highest literacy rate of the world? Isn't their literacy rate like 98%?
Yes, they have a very high literacy rate, but they're not necessarily teaching writing. Well, this is a different talk, but you know, yeah, they're doing some interesting things, but not what we're doing yet.
So do we have anybody in our data that did creative nonfiction? Because that I don't recall.
I don't think there was anybody who specifically said that. There was probably an assignment here or there that would, you know, some of the literacy narrative assignments I think would naturally fall into a creative nonfiction genre, because as Sabah points out, they're personal narratives. So Sabah, did you Sarah, did you have them collect data or keep a journal of their own reading and writing over a period of time? Or
actually, I documented my experience of teaching writing, and I at some point, the way your article titles "Writing About Writing," I was thinking about like instructor autoethnography of teaching writing, something along those lines.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Actually, so when I got to know about this event, I was like, yay, this is like really interesting. So I would love to sort of also read this article and take your 2 cents, and also Miss Salcedo's article as well, as you just mentioned. So I'm definitely going to explore into it.
Good.
So but I have one more question for you. When they did these creative nonfiction piece, like Cindy just said, oh, it's kind of like literacy narrative. How did you differentiate them? How did you tell them that the literacy narrative is what'd you call it, like a personal essay? And how is that different from creative nonfiction?
Actually, that question did come to my mind as well when I was sort of thinking about different genres that I want to teach. So literacy narrative was the sort of the learning curve throughout their life journey so far. And in creative nonfiction, I was asking them to focus on one particular event that happened and build the story around it. Because in autoethnography, it was actually a poetic autoethnography. So I was asking them to write poetry and see them as a qualitative data. So it was like an introduction to poetic autoethnography, where I asked them to sort of introduce themselves, then think about a theoretical or conceptual framework, and then based on that, write poems and have a discussion area or conclusion area where they focus on one poem, and I have them do like haikus. So not much, like just haikus, because it was a research genre. So just an introduction, because writing in haiku could need a very specialized skill, or writing in autoethnography one may need a lot of training in that. So I made it a little bit like sort of introduction to research genre, and as part of it taught poetic autoethnography. So I asked them to sort of focus on each haiku for maybe for a period of time, and then write a sub discussion section about that. So I feel like I was training them throughout. With literacy narrative, I was asking them to see globally their literacy skills, and through creative nonfiction, I asked them to sort of focus on one particular event and build things or think about those things in more micro level.
So interesting.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. I'm sort of thinking, maybe I could do that in my creative writing class next semester.
I want to know what Maria's question is.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca and Cindy. As I was listening to you, I'm wondering if you've noticed differences between teaching writing about writing in freshman composition versus upper level courses, like, senior classes, or, I mean, as we know, the framework is commonly used, with first year writing students and writing classes. And I'm wondering if you saw a difference in the kind of the types of assignments asked, the types of readings that were, shared, just differences across levels, so to speak.
I don't think we had enough data points to be able to say, oh, there is a certain kind of difference, but we had enough to suggest that could be a really good avenue for research. Because there were some people, for instance, at a higher level, wasn't there somebody, was that a grad level or a senior level where they
There
were doing
was.
research presentations problem?
I think in the published article, or we took out all of our charts for some reason and our graphs.
Yeah.
But we did have a graph at one point where we showed all the different levels. We could probably get that for you, Marie, if you want to see that graph. But
Yeah.
people were teaching it at the graduate level. But when we sliced our data, we didn't slice it that way. But
And
we could go back and slice it that way for you. If you're curious, we could probably go back and see, looking at the levels and then going across to the readings and across to the assignments. But what we were doing, it was more vertically, like slicing, like here's all the assignments and here's all the readings, but not cut by level. Maybe we could answer that question by returning to the data. I don't know.
Maybe, but I wouldn't probably be satisfied with the answer just because there weren't enough representatives at the grad level or at the junior senior level. The bulk of them were at the first year. But there were the same kind of range as in next steps. There was a one or two people doing ESL, for example. I think there was some developmental writing. Yeah. And the fact that so many people were teaching first year writing probably explains that one reason why so many people were assigning a fairly traditional form of the research paper, because that is the big requirement at so many places. But we don't know that. We did know that some people were brought to it because it was the method being used in their department, and they didn't necessarily choose it to begin with, whereas other people were really, we asked that question about whether they were proponents of it or not, and there was a range, and there were some people who were almost preacher quality, really hoping to get everybody to use this method. So it's a pretty interesting group of people. I liked reading their responses and enjoyed researching and interviewing them.
I need to tell my story, how I came to this. I don't know if we told it in the article or not, but I was searching for a method, because when I was in my PhD, basically what they were teaching us, my professors were Mark Hurlbert and Don McAndrew. And basically what they were teaching us is that nobody really knows how to do this. It's still up in the air. There's no one right way to do this thing that we're trying to do. So I was looking at teaching through folklore. Like, that was what I found in my doctoral program. I looked at everything and I said, well, this is what we need to do. We need to use folklore. So, okay. And so, but I was still kind of grasping at something. I had just started my first job, and that was in around 2005. And then I met Betsy Sargent, and she said, oh, we're doing this thing, and you should do it too. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll do it. Because I was just searching for something, and then this thing kind of came to me, and that's how it happened. I just random. I was in some kind of a meeting, and Betsy Sargent came in, and she was talking about her textbook, Conversations About Writing, and I said, oh, okay, I'll give it a shot. So that's how I came to it. Well, you want to take that one, Cindy?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there were two trends. Okay, two major trends. One trend was that a lot of people became educated in the writing about writing method through the writing about writing textbook original. And remember that we were collecting our data a few years ago when there really weren't a lot of as many choices as there are now in if you wanted to have a textbook. I'm not even sure if Focus on Writing was available at that time, which is kind of a writing about writing textbook. So there was that way, and that way overlapped with the second trend, which was a few people, I couldn't tell you how many, were brought to it because everybody in their department was using it, or this was the method they were being taught in their graduate program, which strikes me. I thought, well, this is a really cool way to do it in a graduate program because people could be learning about composition pedagogy at the same and research at the same time as they're learning to teach it in this form in a writing about writing classroom. So I thought that was kind of neat. But I don't know if they thought it was neat all the time.
We got a little bit of negativity. We got
Yeah.
definitely some negative comments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we quoted most of the negative comments in the article, but some of the negative comments were just kind of odd to us. And again, when you're, I don't know if any of you have ever done a survey like this, but people will write strange things, especially when you do these I did another open-ended survey about diversity that was published in the peer review. People will write weird things in there and you don't know what they mean. But we did a lot of follow-up interviews so we can clarify with some of the people what they were talking about there.
Right. Right.
Yeah, the method is interesting.
Mm,
Open-ended survey.
I think the people who sounded the most active, let's say, and interested in writing about writing were people who had gone beyond the textbook or had never even used the textbook writing about writing, and instead were collecting their own articles to share with the students based on their own expertise, right? And I'm not sure, but I believe that the data was telling us, but I at least they were suggesting that as people grow used to teaching writing about writing, they make it more their own, and they start basing it more on the things that interest them. And if you think about it, the field itself is a pretty diverse field. We're always arguing about that things because we're so diverse, right? And that's one of that's one of the features of composition and rhetoric that can make it frustrating, but can also make it really, really interesting, right? And
Yep.
that range, that scope just shows up in this data.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
really super interesting because it means there's room in this methodology for people to say comfortably, I use a writing about writing approach, and that approach might have sure some overlap with the things that their colleague down the hall is doing, but won't necessarily be what you would consider writing about writing, or that I would consider writing about writing. And so I think it was important that we did this work to find that out. We were really surprised that there were people who were using this approach who were doing what we thought of as rhetorical analysis, not genre analysis, and not activity theory stuff, but really rhetorical analysis. And we thought about it and thought, well, no, that's part of our tradition. And I learned that way a long time ago. So from writing studies people, and the people I learned from were people who were interested in composition pedagogy. And maybe not in empirical research, but they were interested in the teaching of composition, and in people like Murray and Peter Elbow and people like that long ago, right? So those same people did assigned rhetorical analyses in their classes, among other things. And people are still doing that. Why? Well, analysis is a skill. I mean, lawyers use it all the time. We use it all the time in our reading, right? It's part of our lore, and it's part of our practice, and it's maybe something we haven't done as much empirical research on, interestingly enough, but it's part of what our field has been about. So that was a surprise to me anyway. What surprised you, Becky? Uh-oh. Are you frozen? No.
We do have a
I've been
question
having
from
internet
Miranda.
troubles. I've been having internet troubles.
There's a question from Miranda.
You want me to go ahead while Becky gets her internet back?
Yeah, I'm
Well,
trying.
it's actually,
yeah.
it's, oh.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, it's interesting that Cindy just mentioned Murray and Elbow, because I'm very interested in how sort of expressivism has been over the past sort of since like the great debate of the debate and debates of the 90s, how it's been sort of like defended, kind of re-envisioned, kind of retooled and kind of I don't know, brought back in and into the conversation, namely in that, and particularly with a focus on kind of the extent to which binaries seem to have like kind of caused expressivism to have fallen out of favor, and sort of this like reliance on binaries, and that a lot of people defending expressivism for in fact it having the social, and it's not entirely about the individual, and it's like looking outward as well as the looking inward. And I was just wondering, I mean, it just strikes me that writing about writing is something that could very well address some of that, namely sort of the looking, I mean, just what we're talking about, like autoethnography and looking inward, and as well as obviously thinking about one's social context and the importance of, you know, the public sphere and all that. So I was just wondering if like that, if any of that kind of came up in anyone's responses to these questions. It might not have been, but just sort of this idea that writing about writing is a way to reconcile might be too strong a word, but to kind of to allow both that more expressivist kind of, you know, the allowing the personal and the individual to drive one's writing to a certain extent, but also keeping in mind that writing is social and is always contextualized.
I don't know what Cindy was talking about before when I was being kicked off the internet. But if I repeat what she said, then I'm sorry. But one of the great things that happened with the editor of composition studies as we were doing this was that he made us articulate what we found in our study, which we didn't really kind of know before. And then when we had the aha moment, which just a couple of weeks ago, we've been working on the study 5 years. Did you already say this, Cindy? That did you? Oh, she's on mute. She's on mute.
Cindy, you're on.
No, I didn't mention it, nor did I mention the bit about expressivism that came from our, you know, analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we had this aha moment just a couple weeks ago, and it was amazing that we hadn't noticed it before. You know, like when you're so immersed in some data, you don't see what's just right there. Because I have my students read this Toby Fulweiler article about composition in the 21st century and talking about, okay, here's the expressivist, here's the social constructivism or what have you, and here's the rhetorical. And then as we were looking at those our categories, we're like, duh, there it is. It's right there. It's all there. So all this debate about writing about writing, and then is it this, is it that? But the thing that makes it so wonderful is that it's everything. It kind of brings all the debates together, and it has a place for everything, because someone was asking before about that reflective writing piece and that metacognition. So anytime you're writing reflective writing, you're writing about yourself, you're writing about your own writing process.
A lot about that, and then kind of came to a conclusion that writing about writing does not emerge from post-process, but it emerges from the whole field. And that was partly because of this presence of things like elbow, right? And expressivism, showing up in some of the data.
I'm not sure if am I back on?
Yes.
Am I back on? So I think Cindy and I disagree on that, because the thing I got, we read post-process post-mortem by Lautier, and I absolutely loved it. Read it if you haven't. And he argued that post-process isn't dead, and writing about writing is like the last surviving thread. We could debate that, but I think Irene has a question, and I don't want us to run out of time before we get to that.
Yeah, I have to leave in a few minutes. So I wanted to share, well, I was interested that you were talking about literacy narratives. I actually hadn't thought of literacy narratives as writing about writing, but of course it is. I have a double research project. In fact, I have an article coming out in the spring in WPA all about literacy narratives and their impact on learning and notions of identity, all of that. That's what the articles is about, that. But I just wanted to share, because I think you'll find it interesting, that before I even got to Cal State Northridge, which is where I am, there was a student.
Unknown caller.
Yikes. Let me hang this up. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I got a call that interfered in some way or other. Okay, never mind. Everything is going crazy here at the moment.
It's all working. We can hear you perfectly.
Hear you. I can't see anything. All right. I have a database. I have a double project. There were a pile of journals, published journals, that was called New Voices, written by students, sitting on my desk. And 2 years ago, I got some money for a research project where we began looking. All of these journals had literacy narratives in them. And we created a database of literacy narratives and we are coding them. And now I have another project in which I have instructors assigning literacy narratives, and we're going to be comparing thematically some of the themes in the current literacy narratives and notions of identity and cultural affiliation with the ones that we have in this incredible database that I'm happy to praise, because I didn't create it, my graduate students did. So this is a current project, but I never thought of my projects with literacy narratives as being part of writing about writing, but of course it is. I just didn't think of it in that way.
I think we should try to make sure we get to all the stuff in the chat. Diana, it has gone a little bit quickly. Do you want to highlight any of the questions in the chat that you don't think we've answered?
Yep, I'm trying to type in the closed captioning notes at the same time. So let's see some of the questions here. What trend did you see in the teachers' learning experiences of the instructors you interviewed? It could change their way of teaching writing. Is there a difference? Is there a difference between composition and rhetoric and composition and rhetoric and writing studies? I think you maybe answered that one.
I answered it from my perspective, but I think there's lots of answers to that question.
There is, yeah. That was actually surprising to me in the article too. I don't think I really ever thought about why we moved to writing studies. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, that could be really interesting too.
Well, I see Cindy answered it in the chat, because I think we do more than just.
Yeah, Becky's freezing, but we do so much, and not just professional writing. We do linguistic analysis of anything, right? We do activity theory, and it isn't always about teaching and learning writing. Sometimes it's about doing writing or the written product itself. So.
And Dawn, I'm not sure if the question about the link the link to the readings, there weren't our students, the articles our students read, but the articles that our participants had their students read. And it is up in, do you want to maybe put it again, Cindy? I've got a question for the group. Are any of you engaging on any projects right now that are somewhat related?
A colleague and I have been doing a study, also a longitudinal IRB approved study for a while, also about 5 years, and also a mixed methods study with quite a bit of coding. So I was actually really interested to hear about your coding process and grounded theory and all of that. That is where we really got stuck, because we have about 80 to 85 students in the study, and mixed methods surveys, materials from the classwork. We also actually have permission for institutional data and that sort of thing. So we're trying to pull that all together. And of course, when we originally created the codes, there were too many of them. And I think what's useful in your piece is how you've kind of distilled those down, or you were able, like you said, to keep kind of shaping them until you distilled down into the kind of categories that were most interesting to you. But our study is really looking at writing about writing, pedagogy, methodology as a form of equity, the idea of evening the playing field. In other words, when students are coming in and increasing their self-efficacy, which is what we feel metacognition and metacognitive conversation in the classroom and writing about writing assignments do, that we see this really creating a resource-rich rather than a deficit-based classroom. And we're thinking about how we want to define or think about self-efficacy leading to equity. We also are thinking a lot about it as college initiation, their ability to move or transfer, right? That self-efficacy, not so much the skills, not so much what they're learning, but that confidence in themselves as writers across writing contexts. And we see that in our classes. So we're hoping eventually to have that published.
Are you doing anything to sort of link approaches to metacognition and self-efficacy? Because I have this gut feeling that that's where a lot of it stems from.
Yeah, we've looked at those studies. We're also responding to some of the critiques about writing about writing as not kind of a social justice approach, which I firmly believe is not true, because it's a very capacious methodology, and I think can incorporate all kinds of concerns, and you could teach it from many different ways. But yeah, metacognition is really at the center. The connection or the link between metacognition and self-efficacy is really at the center there. But I'm finding, as you did, that there really aren't very many studies like this on writing about writing. So I think it's a ripe field for research.
Yeah, we definitely need more. But you could teach writing about writing with current traditional methods. You could say, here's one way to do it, and here's how you're going to do it.
Of course.
Right.
Right.
We did find one, I don't even remember which journal it was that initially maybe wanted it, but then decided they didn't, because this doesn't examine outcomes, student outcomes. And we were like, well, this isn't, we thought we needed this research first, before we start looking at what the students are doing in all these different approaches.
I've never used computers for coding and analysis, but then I just got this idea because Cindy said something about AI and everyone's talking about AI. I wonder if AI could help you with your coding.
Oh, absolutely.
A random thought.
Becky, no, they're actually doing this. There's a class at my college you should take next semester on
I want to do AI.
the use of AI in the humanities. But yeah, you could easily, well, not easily, but it would be very similar to asking each other to agree, because the process of getting the computer to do what you want would probably take 100 different iterations. So yeah. And Becky, you did agree with that conclusion toward the end, that writing about writing came out of more than just,
Okay.
you're on
More
mute.
than just post-process.
We have two more questions, and I think maybe we have time for just these last two. So can we hear from Saurabh and Myra?
Yes, in terms of what project sort of everyone is doing, I kind of have an example of speaking about writing in my classroom, which sort of gave me an idea to write about it at some point. And it is also related to autoethnography. When I actually teach, when I started talking about the assignment sheet on autoethnography or how it is done, a student told me, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that words could be data. I always thought numbers can be data." And that instantly prompted me to sort of think about, oh my God, yeah, I mean, depending on what discipline you come from, you have certain conventions about certain elements of research. So, and the student was from statistics. So all their life, they probably must have, for large part, analyzed numbers. And they thought that that's the only. So when I told them to sort of analyze poems as qualitative, see poems as qualitative data and write a discussion section around that, poem can be data as well. So that became sort of like a learning for me, that if I teach, because that's the kind of class context we all are in. Like in FIW, students come from various disciplines and they come with certain kind of literacies about research or writing. And then this FIW classes become, hit or miss for them in terms of how you as an instructor see writing.
That's really cool. We
yeah.
probably have time for Myra's question, and then
I want to add one thing. I don't know if you're going to add this at the end, Diana. For anybody here who's new, be sure to join our listserv, join our standing group at C's, and do all that other good stuff.
I just want to say one thing very quickly before taking Myra's question or comment, that this is our last meet before the holidays. So we want to wish everybody happy holidays and Merry Christmas and wonderful New Year. Myra, you go ahead.
And happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, I forgot. You could tell.
Oh yes, you're Canadian, so you don't have the same.
I was going to say, you could tell that I'm in Canada. We had our Thanksgiving in October, so I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Myra, you go ahead.
Myra, did you?
Oh, I didn't know. I'm hearing impaired, and the closed captioning just didn't work. I'm reading lips, doing my best. Yeah, it happens, but people spoke loud enough, and my hearing aids are working through Bluetooth in my computer. And I just want to say I do something really different about the literacy narrative. I get students from Chicago and Boston who have lived in poor neighborhoods, have not ever read a book in their life. They don't read or write. And so I introduce literacy narratives with, what is it that you do? And I play football. Okay, how is football a literacy? Name a pivotal point when you knew you belonged to the culture. Name me plays, define plays. What is the language that you use that most people won't know? And sometimes it's body movements. And then can you translate this to reading? And they can do it usually. Nice kitty cat. They can do it usually if they start from where they are. I have dancers, I have musicians, and I have got some of the best literacy narratives ever, talking about music is not just dots on a page, and explaining treble clefs and things like that. And I have 11 students entering the literacy narrative archives, which Rebecca knows about. It's online, and they encourage swimming, or whatever a student does, in translating that into, how is this a literacy? How is this its own language, culture, and when did I have a pivotal moment, and how could I translate this to writing? And it's a wonderful site. I'm just saying.
I put it there, but yeah,
Excellent.
we do talk about discourse communities. We did find in our research that people did talk about discourse communities. Yeah, but what the perplexing ones were like, I don't have any themes. We just do writing. And those kind of answers were also perplexing because you got to do something. You got to go to class and teach something.
Well, thank you so much to our speakers today, to Cynthia and Rebecca. We really appreciate you talking about the study, and it really was a vibrant conversation. I'm so sorry about the closed captioning, Myra. I hope my typing got through a little. I don't know if you saw it or not, but I will save that, and I will also save the chat. And if anybody wants either of those, I can email those to you as well. And this event will also have been recorded.
Thank you
So thank you all.
And Joel Block, if you're my old friend Joel Block, you've got to email me. I miss you.
Okay, I will try
thank
to
you so
add you
much.
to the listserv. Okay, good
Great,
night,
great.
everybody. Happy
Good
Thanksgiving.
night. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.